Thank you to those who made this symposium possible. I appreciate the opportunity to share a history of my great-grandfather, Kumen Jones. It has been a great 7-year adventure for me to research and write Kumen's history. A couple years ago, I shifted the focus of the book from being a chronological history to one based on character virtues that were very important to Kumen and also to the other San Juan pioneers. Many friends and leaders urged Kumen to write his history. His reply regarding his writing skills was this: "There seems to be a disposition to give me more credit than is due me. I don't think of a scrubbier, more dishonorable game than this would be on my part, to attempt to put this over." Scrubby and dishonorable certainly do not describe Kumen Jones, nor any of the San Juan missionaries, but humble and modest do. The story of the San Juan mission is an unbelievable, even miraculous story. Kumen wrote this description of the Hole in the Rock expedition. "When I look back upon the large company traveling, blasting, and working their way through a country of that nature, 6 months in the midst of one of the severest winters, it looks to me that there was something more than human power or wisdom associated with it." He continued, "When this bedraggled company of tired pilgrims straggled into the present site of Bluff, many of the teams were unable to proceed further. Some remained at Bluff on that account, but most of those who settled at that point did so from religious and conscientious motives, and under the protection and blessings of a kind providence. Gratitude to and faith in God were primary virtues that sustained these pioneers through adversity and setbacks. They were prepared and willing. Kumen lost his father when he was 6. His mother, Sage Treharn Jones, had faith to take initiative to engage her 6 children in helping with work, even finding jobs for them at early ages. Kumen began his training as a blacksmith, but opportunities in Cedar City and in Salt Lake that she set up failed due to unreliable blacksmiths. Sage persisted and found other opportunities to herd and care for neighbors' animals. At 14, Kumen learned to freight logs. At 16, he joined his brother Lehi delivering the mail to Nevada. And at 19, the 2 brothers were responsible for the large Cedar City cattle herd. In each job, Kumen learned basic skills critical later in the building of the settlement of Bluff. One frequent lesson was in dealing with horses and wagons. In one outing with his best gal, Mary Nielsen, he drove several friends from an outing to the sawmill in Cedar Canyon. They were happily singing Sweet Belle Mahone when they came to the place in the song that goes, "Wait for me at heaven's gate," and the wagon suddenly tipped over. Kumen later wrote, "My best gal and myself jumped out free of the wagon. All of the others were under the wagon, and we lifted the side of the wagon up far enough to let the others out. No harm was done. We went on our way rejoicing, feeling sure that our escape from that perilous upset was providential. Aunt Mary and I had help raising that wagon so as to let our chums out of the trap." In another incident, Kumen was driving a heavy load of logs down Cedar Canyon on a cold morning with a skiff of snow. As he began a long, steep dugway, the rough log broke. He described what came next. "Down we shot, bouncing down over the snow and frozen ground. I slid onto one of the wheel horses, and one chance in 1,000, I lit one foot on the horse's hip and made a spring out clear of the wagon. I lit in an oak patch, free of and safe. He later wrote a compliment to the horses for knowing how to later pull off the slope and stop the load. And then he said, had they not done so, wreck, ruin, and death, or crippled horses would have resulted. Kumen wrote of numerous such mishaps, including being drugged by a horse and another with a cinch, coming loose and his horse panicking and running, quote, pell-mell down a steep, treacherous slope. And then he concluded, how it all happened and nothing harmed is the mystery of it all. In describing many such hazards, he almost always expressed gratitude for divine intervention in his safety, never suffering any broken bones or other serious injuries. The San Juan missionaries entered their calling prepared with skills and faith to accomplish the seemingly impossible. They were protected from many hazardous situations throughout their mission. In another situation before his mission, Kumen was assessing the needs of the Cedar City cattle herd and found a corral built by rustlers where they were butchering the Cedar City cattle. He burned the corral. A few days later, he found another similar corral and began to burn it also. But as he lit his only match, a sudden gust of wind blew the match out, leaving him with no means to burn the corral. Years later, Kumen met a man who reminded him of this incident, and he said, I was standing in the bushes with a gun, and I was going to shoot you. But something kept me from doing it. Later, Kumen reflected once again, when I hark back and recall many times I have been preserved when passing through tight places where I escaped with such a narrow margin in my favor, I freely and gladly acknowledge the hand of a kind providence in my preservation, which debt it will not be within my power to repay. I may have another chance, who knows? Another important virtue crucial to the survival and success of the San Juan missionaries was that of initiative. Leonardo da Vinci once wrote of its importance in this statement. I have been impressed with the urgency of doing. Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Being willing is not enough. We must do. As a San Juan missionary and pioneer, Kumen and the other bluff settlers were men and women of initiative. Later in his life, Kumen wrote this short statement that reflected what was likely his lifelong motto: keep busy and work to best advantage. York and Evelyn Jones, authors of a biography of Kumen's older brother Lehi, wrote many stories of Kumen's childhood. They documented that Kumen and his younger brother Jedediah were very rambunctious children. Of them, it was said, quote, they will never amount to a hill of beans. Kumen later wrote, I have a more or less clear remembrance of some few things that happened when I was 2 years old. One was that I started our team of oxen off when there was no one on the wagon with me, causing a panic among the folks. In another recollection, Kumen wrote about letting all the family herd of wild goats out of the corral, never to be seen again. Also from Lehi's biography is this story. While Kumen and Jedediah were at home alone, an old Indian came to visit. The young boys talked him into praying for rain, which was badly needed. There was no ceiling in the house, and while the Indian was on his knees, the boys climbed up in the rafters with a bucket of water and sprinkled it down on the praying Indian. Victor Hugo wrote a definition of initiative and added an important detail, quote, doing the right thing without being told. As a boy, Kumen's application of initiative often lacked a sense of right, but he did initiate his mischief without being told. The right part would come later and become vital in all of Kumen's initiative. Throughout his life, Kumen's daily schedule began very early. When home, he would rise at 4 o'clock every morning, start a fire at the co-op, and come home and join the family for breakfast, and give each child a candy from the store, a favorite memory later in their lives. One job that Kumen took initiative to do every day he could throughout his life and even shortly before he died was chopping wood. After arriving in San Francisco for cancer treatments for his wife, Mary, and son, Leonard, he wrote, I got permission of the Panhandle Park authorities to get some wood from the pruning of the big trees there. Had to pack it across the highway to our apartment where I chopped it up for us and our landlady. I felt better for the exercise. Kumen was 75 at this time. At the age of 80, a few months after having his left leg amputated from a blood clot, his son Leland helped him set up a table to cut a large cottonwood tree that was only partly dry. It turned out to be, quote, extra tough and hard to cut. Rather than see this as a negative thing, Kumen wrote the following, it only made more and harder exercise for me. I will not hesitate to recommend this exercise to furnish play. Physical exercise will help work up an appetite, pass the time away, save expense, and balance the family budget. It also acts as a good example to the neighbors, especially to my family that were living in a home that he bought next door to them in Blanding. The San Juan missionaries were amazing doers. The San Juan Record staff writer, Buckley Jensen, once wrote an article about Kumen Jones. In it, Jensen wrote the following, quote, Kumen Jones was one of the most highly respected and accomplished of the founding fathers of San Juan County. To try to put this man's life into the thimble of a single newspaper page is akin to trying to empty Lake Powell with a teacup. This colorful language is delightful and applies not only to Kumen Jones, but to all of the San Juan missionaries. Another virtue in times of trial and adversity is that of loyalty. In David Carpenter's biography of Jens Nielsen, he shared two stories of Kumen's loyalty. In one, Kumen, a man small in stature, was in the co-op and heard Mary's brother, Jens Jr., a giant of a man, criticizing their son, Leonard. Kumen reportedly jumped over the counter and went after Jens Jr. and had to be pulled off by his friend Lemuel Red, who said, Kumen, you can't whip Jens today. Kumen was loyal to his family and also to his friend Lemuel Red. Kumen and Mary quickly developed a love and loyalty for the Indians. Kumen was given the Navajo name Dag-a-Lichii, interpreted meaning red whiskers. The name they gave Mary was Tam-aski-chi, which meant toothless. Mary had store teeth, and when their Indian friends came to visit, she amused them by taking her teeth out to show them. In Carpenter's second story, Kumen showed his loyalty to the Native American neighbors. In this story, he even displayed this loyalty in speaking out against his personal friends and leaders for whom he showed great loyalty otherwise. In this meeting of the directors of the Bluff Co-op in 1891, during a period of unprecedented profits, Kumen took a rare position to stand alone in opposition to the low prices being paid to the Indians for their sheep and other commodities. Bishop Nielsen and President Hammond both opposed Kumen's stand, even speaking for more than an hour about the issue later that week in church. Kumen persisted in his support of the Indians. In the end, Kumen committed to supporting his leaders. But after this incident, the co-op actually began paying noticeably higher prices to the Indians, even showing subsequent cash shortages as a result. Probably the most notable example of loyalty in Kumen's family was that of his second wife, Lydia May Lyman Jones. While the rest of the family were at a meeting across the street, Lydia May was caring for the 4 youngest children at home. She set the coal oil lamp on a wooden chest. One of the children tipped the lamp over, igniting Lydia's dress. Rather than put out the fire, she protected the children first and took them out to safety. Lydia May then returned to put out the fire in the home. That done and still on fire, she ran screaming from the house and jumped into some water on the porch. But it was too late. Mary and the others cared for May. The burns were severe, and for 9 days she lived with intense pain until she died. Lydia was buried on the hill above the fort, next to her 2 children who had died before her in infancy. Another virtue critical to the survival and success of the San Juan settlers was that of courage. Hattie Barton wrote in the San Juan record about Kumen this description, quote, "One of his outstanding characteristics was his fearlessness in meeting hazardous and dangerous situations," unquote. When Amasa Barton was killed in 1887 by 2 Navajos at a trading post nearby at Rincon, many of the Navajo tribe blamed the San Juan settlers. Shortly after this, 100 braves arrived at the fort, armed in war paint and prepared to kill the settlers. Jens Nielsen and Kumen Jones were the only men at the fort at the time. Their deep loyalty to their friendship with the Indians gave them the courage to calmly invite them off their horses, to set their rifles aside and talk as friends. Eventually, the Indians did, ending with a great meal, a night's rest at the fort, and a renewed friendship. A second story of Kumen showing courage occurred when boys from Bluff invited members of a nearby cowboy camp to a Bluff dance. Several cowboys arrived giving a surprising and frightening presents. Leaders refused them admission to the dance. The cowboys left on their horses, upset and shooting their guns. A few days later, out on the range, Kumen encountered a large group of the same cowboys. He listened to their angry threats to return and get revenge. He later described listening to the cowboys vent their anger. He then asked to speak. They were surprised and became silent. He then stood and in his words, quote, "I read them the riot act." He reminded them that they had been treated fairly, with kindness by the settlers. He apologized for the misunderstanding at the dance. He then described their reaction at the dance as, quote, "cowardly and contemptible." The cowboys were silent. From one of Albert R. Lyman's histories of San Juan, he wrote of this story and included the following while writing While riding with two of the roughest cowboys, one of them said to Kumen, "I didn't think any man could talk as you have to that outfit and not get killed, but you had truth and right on your side." He then promised to never take a gun with him to Bluff again. The Bluff pioneers had courage. They also believed in traveling unarmed in peace wherever they went. Another virtue Kumen wrote about was integrity. Francis Hammond, stake president, once wrote that Kumen came as close to being completely honest as any man he knew. At the age of 16, Kumen got a job delivering the mail from Cedar City to Bullionville, Nevada, over 225 miles away. They were required to ride alone through rough communities filled with gambling, drinking, and shooting guns in the streets. One day while on the route, he noticed a handkerchief in the trail. He stopped, picked it up, and unwrapped $100. When he arrived at his next stop, he reported the find to the postmaster, who urged him to keep the money. The next morning, Kumen left the money with the postmaster, who again urged him to keep it. Returning from Nevada, he found the money still unclaimed, but refused to take it. When Kumen told the story to his family, it caused excitement, but his mother cautioned him to not be too hopeful. When Kumen returned, at last he could honestly feel that the money was his, returning home proud and happy. Once Kumen became successful in the cattle business, he did his banking in Durango, Colorado. His son Francis later told the story of Kumen cashing his annual check. Upon counting the money outside, he found that they had given him $50 too much. He went back into the bank and reported the mistake. The bank clerk said, "Well, I am sorry. We do not rectify any mistakes after you leave the window." And Kumen apparently replied, "Well, not even if it's in my favor?" Well, Kumen was then allowed to give the money back. San Juan pioneers were honest. Another virtue, the hole in the rockers, as they were later called, developed through the years in Bluff, was patience. In later years, Kumen's children shared stories of Kumen's patience and calmness. His son Alma recalled helping his father on several jobs to haul logs that were washed down the San Juan River. They would drive the loaded wagon in the river bottom. One load sank into a large area of quicksand. Alma continued, "The thing that I have marveled at all my life was that if my father was aggravated, you couldn't tell it. He didn't get the least bit excited, and he didn't flare up and cuss. He just went to work. We had to unload that whole load of wood, and then we had to dig out every one of the wheels and gather some limbs, and then we had to carry those limbs out quite a ways and put them under each one of the wheels. Finally, it was solid, and we put the wood back on and went home." Stories from the lives of Kumen and the other San Juan missionaries, such as these, tell of pioneers who lived virtues to the very best of their ability. The San Juan settlers required many virtues in the various challenges that they faced through years of service and endurance. Kumen and Mary were released from their mission in 1921 after serving nearly a 41-year mission. After Kumen's leg was amputated, he spent more time reading the scriptures. At this time, as he recovered, Kumen's son Marvin went to Kumen's home each evening after working on the family farms. Marvin wrote in his journal that nights were the hardest for Kumen, who at this time was usually in constant pain. On June 3rd, 1936, Marvin recorded the following, quote, "I stayed with Father. He has a wonderful spirit with him. He says many points of the gospel are being made plain and bright to him through his ordeal. He has wonderful manifestations, some of which he will not be able to reveal until we meet again." Kumen died 6 years later on June 10th, 1942, at the age of 86. Included in Kumen's writings is a section headed with this statement, "Boys and girls, please take notice." And that heading was followed with this preface, "You are looking ahead. I am looking back. Youth may pick up some useful items from my personal experience." This statement was followed by Kumen's personal 10 commandments, and then 20 pages of advice to his posterity. As we conclude today, let us think and ponder the life and virtues of Kumen Jones and all of the San Juan missionaries. It seems certain they were sent to San Juan to accomplish something important, not just to them or for them, but also to God. This mission continues on today, not formally, but informally, and now depends on each one of us to identify our purpose and live the virtues necessary to fulfill our mission. Thank you for taking time to read Kumen's writings online at kumenjones.org, a great website created by Calvin MacDonald, who is son of Merle MacDonald, who was a daughter of Alma Jones, who was a son of Kumen Jones. The book, Kumen Jones, The Heart of a Pioneer, is being published by Shumway Family Publishing and will be available by Labor Day. Thank you.